Thank you, everybody, for joining me. Benoit Lavinal. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. You are Global Head of Procurement at the UK's Corio generation. Your company has, amongst other things, projects in Taiwan, a country which I understand has very precise rules when it comes to offshore wind. Tell us more about that.
Sure. Nice to meet you all. Indeed, Benoit, Head of Procurement Corio. For those of you that don't know, Corio is a new offshore wind player, which is part of the Macquarie Investment Bank that started the 1st of April last year with a portfolio of 30 gigawatts of offshore wind across the world. And indeed, Taiwan is a very interesting market for us. We've been present in Taiwan since the first round, which was built 5 or 6 years ago. And Taiwan, from the first round, has been setting up very specific tendering requirements in terms of local requirements, right? And every round that passes by, and now we are the third round, these requirements has increased, has been more specific, and has been more challenging, I would say, both for us and the supply chain. So that's something that we are actively involved in and trying to maximize the value both for ourselves and for the supply chain.
It has a very, as you said, very precise percentage of local content that needs to go in different parts of the project, right? What do you think is the limit? What are the limits of such a system?
Sure. So, I mean, for those of you that are not familiar with the Taiwanese tendering rules, so indeed now we get to a stage where there's a percentage for every subcomponents, cables, towers. We're even doing local contracts with paint providers, you know, to really get to the maximum local content. Indeed, what it brings is, in one sense, it has created some new players in the market, but at the same time, they need a lot of support and help from developers to really help to make these commitments reality, which, you know, putting this sort of challenge on top of already a challenging development process, it brings a lot of interesting joint collaboration opportunity with the supply chain.
Is it getting easier for you, given that you've been in the market for a while? Mm-hmm. Is it getting easier to get your bearings to know with whom to work?
It is getting easier in the sense that I think we understand the players in the market better, right? I think we're very well connected and understanding the written and unwritten rules, I would say. But it's not necessarily made easier the fact that the requirements are increasing still every tender, right? So where we thought we could find a solution, we need to scratch our head and find even newer solutions for this round.
You also have 5 projects in Brazil, and you can tell us a bit more about how that country is getting into offshore wind, right?
So indeed, I mean, as I mentioned at the beginning, Corio has a very large portfolio of projects across the world, and especially in emerging markets. And we see Brazil as well a very interesting market that is on the verge of becoming reality. And we are hoping and pushing to maybe have a first auction maybe even next year. So indeed, we have a local team of a couple of representatives that are very well connected in Brazil. And what we're trying to do is advocate and support the Brazilian authorities to trying to learn from the best practice that we've seen in Europe, especially on how to set up local requirements, how to help build a supply chain in the way that is sustainable, right? That it doesn't create small spot of capacities that eventually disappear. So we're doing our utmost, and in that sense, for example, we're using the ScotWind rules in Scotland as an example of something that we feel was quite a good mix of qualitative criteria and still being quite competitive. So we are trying to help to get to that sustainable supply chain eventually. But it's really the start of the process. So of course we'll know next year how much they've listened to us or to other players and see where the market is going.
Great, thank you very much, Benoit Lavinal.
Pleasure.
Thalia, Valkouma, you're co-founder and partner of FARIA Group and president and CEO of independent power producer FARIA Renewables. Your company has been a technical advisor to the Greek government and the country's TSO for the past 2.5 years. And Greece voted through an offshore wind law in August last year. So can you tell us the latest about this market? What's happening right now? What are the plans? What is happening in the future?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, just
okay.
Very close to your mouth.
Okay, first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to speak here.
Thank you for coming.
And to give you my congratulations for all the organization of the event. As you very well said, last year, by the end of July, there was the release of the Offshore Wind Act in Greece. And this was the result of more than 2 years and a half of activities, both in technical, legal, administrative, and governmental level. Regarding our role, we have made all the technical assessment of the Greek maritime area based on numerous criteria and parameters in order to spot which are the most receptive areas for the development of offshore wind projects, both bottom fixed and floating projects as well. The parameters that were used were on and off criteria, but also soft criteria. So there were parameters related to antiquities, related to fisheries, to navigation lines, electricity grid and telecommunication grid, and many others, of course, sea depth and wind speed. And all this created a very complex and very, let's say, challenging environment in order to select and spot which are the most receptive areas. Of course, you can see that also in the slide, where all the parameters are, let's say, presented. In this slide, you can see the presentation of all the parameters related to the sea depth. And I have another one related to the wind speed as well, if we can change it.
It's on the green button, I think.
Okay, here also you can see the same, the adaptation of all the parameters related to the wind speed. All these parameters, when they were applied, they gave us a result of areas, potential areas, with a capacity of, for bottom fixed projects from 4 to 7 gigawatts, and related to floating projects, a capacity, potential capacity of more than 35 gigawatts. All these were, as I told you, were applied, and there were certain areas. Here in this slide you can see the areas that are right now they are investigating for the first cycle of the offshore wind project in Greece. So that happened up to July last year, 2022. But what is happening now? So after this, activities haven't stopped. And a lot of presidential decrees and ministerial decisions are needed in order to achieve and have the first call of interest for research in Q1 and Q2 or Q2 of 2024. There's going to be an announcement and call of interest for research in the first areas that are going to be announced. The interested developers and investors will come and express interest, and based on several technical and financial criteria, they will be selected. Then they will make all the researches for more or less approximately 24 months, and then there's going to be the CFD auction. This is, let's say, estimated to be in 2026. And after that, the preferred bidder will be the one that will go on with the development, construction, and of course operation of the project in those areas. We estimate that the first projects will be operational in 2031, approximately more or less that period. Something that I would like, let's say, to mention, and is something that is de-risking the whole situation, is that the grid connection of the project is going to be secured from the very first moment, which is very important for investors and for developers to know this. Based on the national Greek plan for energy and climate, the short-term target for offshore wind projects in Greece is 2.6, 2.7, up to 2031, 2032, and the long-term target in up to 2050 is approximately 17 gigawatts of projects. So this is the situation right now in Greece.
All right, and I suppose your company is trying to get a part of that cake?
Certainly, our company is very interested in participating and having a part in the offshore Greek wind market. Of course, and for that reason, we are in discussions with interested investors and developers. Of course, Greece is not only our target, but we are targeting in other offshore wind markets as well, either existing ones or upcoming, evolving ones, because the strategy of our company and what we really believe is that the offshore wind technology is a must if we want to achieve energy neutrality and zero energy conditions. So it's our strategic target to have part of our portfolio, which is going to be, we aim to have it more than 5 gigas in the following years, is part of it has to be has to consist of offshore wind projects, both in Greece but in other countries, European and in other continents as well.
And when it comes to Greece, to what extent do you think Greece is going to do the same as other countries? Are they going to rely on similar supply chains? Are they going to construct their own one? What about the price? Do we know it's going to be very high, very low?
Something that I would like to highlight before speaking about the supply chain is that although there are similarities between the different markets, each market has its own individualities, uniquenesses and challenges. That is more for evolving markets, such as Greece. And I will use the example, the paradigm of Greece, where, for example, the situation, the environment in Greece is certainly different than the one in the northern seas. So there are differences regarding the sea depth. The seabed is very steep. The depth of the sea is very big in a short distance from shore. Also, the wave conditions are very different. Also, we have geopolitical situations that we have to take care of. So, take into consideration that all this assessment is done within the 6 nautical miles, which is 11.1 kilometers from shore. If we compare it with where the parks in northern seas or in UK are situated, this is a very short distance. So there are differences which have to be taken into consideration very seriously. Regarding the supply chain, this is also another big difference and a very big challenge. For example, as all of us know that we have to minimize the LCOE because the cost of energy has to be very low. This is the target of all countries and of all, let's say, developers. If we, for example, in Greece or in the Mediterranean Sea, if we use the supply chain in the northern areas, that would be very difficult and that would raise very much the cost of the project. So what is needed and what we really want for Greece is Greece to be, to act as a hub for supply chain, not only for the Greek projects, but also in the Mediterranean Sea. And this can be done based, for example, on the history of Greece, on the, for example, the ports and the shipyards in Greece. If they are renovated, they can be used for the construction and operation, the O&M of offshore wind projects in Greece and all Mediterranean. Also, as Greece is a pioneer in the shipping sector, fleets can be constructed of ship that they're going to be used in the offshore wind industry. So this is very, very important, and we really have to start from yesterday if we want to be in front of what is going on.
A lot of things to do indeed. Thank you very much, Thalia Valkouma. Now, Norway has a lot of renewables experience, but when it comes to offshore, it's offshore wind. It's still in its early days. Behind me, we should now be able to see a picture of a wind farm, I hope, which is the 88 megawatt floating project. No, that's not the one. Hywind Tampen. It's a photo. No? Yeah, there we go. This is Hywind Tampen. Mr. Ambassador Niels ENGELSCHIØN, hello. Thank you for being with us. This is a bit of a peculiar project, though, right? It's not only located next to oil and gas platforms, it's powering it up. Is that the right thing to do, though?
Well, if you ask me, of course it is. because this is actually an example of how far we've come. And we talked about this last year as well at the Seanergy, but I think actually this shows the importance of combining the two. What actually this is doing, this is electrifying the gas and oil platforms. As you probably know, is that most of the Norwegian electricity and energy is already renewable. So we have to use it in one way or another now, and why not try to then decarbonize and make it as best as possible in the oil and gas sector. So we use the technology from the oil and gas sector, make the floating or the wind mills, and then try to re-electrify the platforms.
But obviously, Norway has more there's more to come in Norway. You're planning to have 30 gigawatts of offshore wind installed by 2040. How is your country going to go about this?
Well, it's quite ambitious. That must be true.
We agree.
It is ambitious, and actually the plan is to build 1,500 wind turbines by the next 20 years, which is very ambitious. This will provide us the amount of more or less the same electricity we actually produce today. So we will double that within 20 years. And as my Prime Minister described it, it's a major industrial milestone for Norway. And definitely it is. It's ambitious, but it's possible. Now we have actually opened for concessions 2 new fields. Utsira Nord, which is outside of Bergen on the west coast, and in the southern part of the North Sea, Sørlige Nordsjø, towards Denmark. And the initial plan there is 1.5 gigawatts, but Utsira could actually go up to 6 if we manage to do everything we are aiming for. So we believe actually that floating is, it will be definitely significant in the years to come. We have 2 things, is that floating wind is one of these 2 is floating, and the other one is more traditional, bottom fixed. But we have to show that we can actually handle both. We can have, so floating will be part of the future. It will not be dominant for the years to come, but still it will be very important in the coming development. Any, well, next, just if you'd like to have just a few words on the next rounds, perhaps you might be interested. We will plan to tender the next round of new areas for offshore in 2025. We're now in the process of identifying new areas that might be suitable for deployment. As you know, we have ample space and many good areas, both for floating and bottom fixed. So now this is actually in the process of coming up now.
And obviously Norway has a lot of experience in the offshore sector, but oil and gas sector. Do you think it will be easy or feasible to transfer that knowledge you accumulated in that sector onto to the offshore wind energy sector?
Well, to put it simply, Norway is actually built on offshore experience and, of course, oil and gas experience. So this oil and gas sector that has been extremely successful the past 50 years has really given us companies that have, they know how to operate in harsh environments. You talked about the North Sea, and of course it's different than in Greece, but it's quite different. Very harsh offshore conditions, and I think there's no other really tough test for the offshore sector than in the North Sea. And what we see now is these companies really are rapidly transferring their knowledge into the offshore wind sector. So that's actually, it's a win-win situation in that sense.
All right. Thank you very much. Ambassador ENGELSCHIØN, Thalia, Valkouma, and Benoit Lavinal. Just bear with me a few more minutes, because last week I had the occasion to talk to Jocelyn Brown-Saracino, the offshore wind energy lead at the US Department of Energy. And I started by asking her how the country is... Oh, we have a... That's funny. Summing up that discussion here on stage. So we're talking about Greece, Brazil, Taiwan, taking into account the local context of countries.
Could I just make a little comment before maybe we move to the video? Just talking about supply chain, and we talk a lot about supply chain, and I've been in that industry for like 20 years or so. I think we need to do a lot more to help build a sustainable supply chain for industry. I think we have suppliers that have been asked to do too much in too many countries at the same time. And I think we need to be able to build on our capabilities, like in Norway, and build on your capabilities and not necessarily ask the suppliers to set up new capacities in every market we go. We need to also have like pipelines of projects that are predictable, that are being developed. So really, I think we need to take care of that supply chain, because we've been asking a lot in terms of cost reduction, but we need to be able to help them to build a sustainable supply chain going forward.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And we're now going to play the video, sorry. So I talked to Jocelyn Brown-Saracino, the offshore wind energy lead at the US Department for Energy. And I started by asking her how the country was hoping to catch up with other countries.
Here in the United States, over the last 2.5 years, the United States has made a really big push to try to accelerate and expand the deployment of offshore wind in recognition of both its economic value and its benefit to our overarching efforts to decarbonize both our electricity sector by 2035 and our broader economy by 2050. In March of 2021, the U.S. Department of Energy, in partnership with the Departments of Commerce and Interior, announced a deployment goal for offshore wind of deploying 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, and indicating that reaching that target could get us on the pathway to 110 gigawatts or more of offshore wind by 2050. And doing that could have enormous benefits. It could result in $12 billion in capital investments in projects alone by over each year between now and 2030. It could result in tens of thousands of jobs, including both those in the offshore wind sector as well as those in surrounding communities. And it would also avoid 78 million metric tons of carbon dioxide. Today in the United States, while I mentioned we only have 7 turbines that are in the water producing power, we do have a robust and rapidly growing offshore wind pipeline with 52 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity in various stages of development. And the history of offshore wind development in the United States has really been marked by state leadership, and state planning targets have provided much of the impetus historically for offshore wind development. And right now in the United States, states have approximately 43 gigawatts of offshore wind targets that are codified under their laws. And when we look at their broader planning targets that include both those codified under laws and those less legally mandated targets, they have 109 gigawatts of planning targets for offshore wind. So we have a small industry right now, but really looking to expand that moving forward. And one thing that I do want to note is that, like France, the United States has a rich offshore wind resource, but in order to access the entirety of that resource, we're going to need floating offshore wind technologies. About 2/3 of the United States offshore wind resources in deeper waters that require floating offshore wind technology. That's about 2.8 terawatts of technical resource in those deeper waters. And, given the magnitude of that resource, capturing even a small percentage of that could power tens of millions of American homes and really help revitalize coastal economies.
You have ambitious targets, obviously, in the US. If you could tell us a bit more about how the government on the federal level, but also maybe on the state level, the different states, are they going to support these targets, help developers reach those targets?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's quite a bit of work being done to support offshore wind development in the United States. Of course, over the last 2 years, we saw landmark legislation in the form of both the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. And these come with both suite of tax credits to support clean energy development, as well as to support the standing up of manufacturing and supply chain infrastructure in the United States. It also comes along with resources for things like port upgrades and transmission infrastructure. And states are also contributing to, in addition to their planning targets, to investments in port facilities and really working to facilitate the development of the new industry. Additionally, in the United States, in our federal waters, so typically in most regions, that's waters that are greater than 3 nautical miles from shore. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, which sits within the Department of Interior, is responsible for leasing offshore wind. And over the last 2 years, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management has expanded leasing on 3 coasts, expanding opportunities in the Atlantic, opening up the Gulf of Mexico to leasing for offshore wind, and holding the first ever commercial lease auction for floating offshore wind off of California. And they've also published a 5-year roadmap for their leasing activities, which help developers and communities really plan for how offshore wind is going to evolve in the United States moving forward. And here at the Department of Energy, we're working on a range of different efforts to really try to expand the potential for offshore wind, both fixed bottom and floating in the United States. We're supporting R&D to really help continue to catalyze cost reductions. We're working on R&D that really helps ensure that the technologies are well suited to U.S. design conditions, from soft sediments in the Gulf of Mexico to hurricane conditions along our East Coast. We've worked to help support the development of a national supply chain roadmap for offshore wind. We're working to develop plans for transmission development on both the East and West Coast. And as I mentioned, through new legislation, we also have resources to support transmission development, as well as additional capacity to provide loan guarantees to a range of activities, from providing federal loan guarantees to offshore wind projects themselves, to elements of the supply chain, to transmission.
Do you think, as what we call an emerging market, obviously only when it comes to offshore wind energy, will the US be able to fully benefit from existing experience in the market? I mean, are you going to be able to build at the same costs, or will you have to set up your own supply chain? And obviously that might, also mean that developers will get more subsidies in the beginning because it just costs more.
Yeah, so I think that we're going to be able to leverage and learn a huge amount from the European experience. And I think that will help us catalyze our cost reduction curves. It will help us build up a supply chain more rapidly than we might have, just building on both the maturation of the industry as well as the best practices and learned experience out of Europe. That being said, we do the nature of offshore wind and the expense associated with transport and logistics really necessitates the development of some localization of the supply chain and some upgrades to infrastructure. And that does come with upfront investment. And so that upfront investment is going to be necessary. The supply chain, the National Offshore Wind Supply Chain Roadmap that I mentioned, works to try to demarcate the amount of investment that we're going to need to develop a mature supply chain by 2030. And we know that we need additional investment in things like port upgrades, in vessels for offshore wind development, particularly wind turbine installation vessels and heavy lift vessels. And so we're working to coordinate across a whole range of actors to really make sure that those upfront investments happen in informed and targeted ways.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
That was Jocelyn Brown-Saracino, offshore wind energy leader at the US Department of Energy. Thank you very much for participating in this panel, and thank you very much for listening.